This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to announce the release of my new book, Obama's True Legacy: How He Transformed America. There's a reason why Mike Huckabee calls it a ferocious and chilling read. Order it now at Amazon.com or at FrontPageMag.com. Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, another fantastic program with another fantastic guest. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember we're a fan-generated program, and we are still being shadow banned and persecuted in many ways by the deep state. So please go to our YouTube and Rumble channels and subscribe and press instant notifications. Go to jamieglazov.com and subscribe to our newsletter there. If you're in a giving mood, please donate to us through our PayPal link. And follow us on X at Jamie Glazov, on Instagram at Jamie Glazov, and on Facebook at Jamie Glazov. And most importantly, keep supporting Annie Cyrus and checking out all her great work at liveuptofreedom.com. What an honor this evening to be joined by Robert Spencer, the director of Jihad Watch, a Shulman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and his latest book is Anti-Semitism, History and Myth. Robert, what a pleasure to have you back.
Jamie, it's always my honor to be here. Thank you.
Robert, you have many books, including The Complete Infidel's Guide to Iran. And I think that is, to say the least, very timely at this moment. We just watched this quote-unquote war between Israel and Iran, and the U.S. joined it. What does your book tell us about this, and give us your perspective on this quote-unquote war?
Well, you know, The Complete Infidel's Guide to Iran, it's kind of funny because I wrote it almost 10 years ago, and yet looking back at it now, I find that it's got a lot of information in it that explains what's going on now, because in there I describe what the Islamic regime is all about, what its purposes are, what its goals are, and so on. And it hasn't changed. It's still pursuing the same goals, and they include the destruction of America and the destruction of Israel. Now, of course, I just debated last week Dave Smith, and he was pouring scorn all over the idea that Iran could be any threat to America at all. I think, unfortunately, that's dangerously naive, because nuclear energy nowadays, it can easily fall into the wrong hands. Even the Islamic Republic itself, being a rogue state, could send somebody over here with a dirty bomb. These things are not in the slightest degree outside the realm of possibility. We have to remember that the Ayatollah Khamenei said that death to America is not just a slogan, it's a policy. It's one of the guiding principles of the Iranian Islamic regime. And so I think one of the most disappointing aspects of what's being called this 12-day war is that we are here now on this date after the conflict has ceased, or at least paused, and the Islamic Republic is still in power. Now, there's a lot of hysteria about that, as you know, Jamie. A lot of people on the right saying, well, we don't want another costly and pointless, endless regime change war. And I'm certainly not advocating for that. I do not think that American troops should go into Iran. I don't think Israeli troops should go into Iran. I think that that would be a grave mistake, and that nobody's actually contemplating that. But the fact is that the Iranian regime is wildly unpopular in Iran itself. And it wouldn't take much of a push for it to fall altogether. There was a real chance that could happen while the regime was being shook by these strikes from Israel. And it seems as if it's hard to escape the impression that the whole thing stopped short of a goal. It seems to me to be very likely that the Iranian people, given the chance, would throw off this regime. They may still do it. They could do it tomorrow. but the more help they get from the West, the sooner that will be. And to leave that regime in power now is to prolong the suffering of the Iranian people.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Robert. Let me focus on a few things that you just said very importantly, and as always, you say them very profoundly. I watched your debate with Dave Smith. You did fantastic, Robert. Something that just always rubs me the wrong way, uh, especially the way that Dave Smith had just kind of very condescendingly and dismissively kind of talking about the Iranian threat. And that's what these people do that are always minimizing this threat. So if one even just looks at what these mullahs have been screaming from the rooftops, how they took our hostages, what they did to the Marine barracks back in, I think it was 83, through Hezbollah and their proxies. If we look at what they've done with the kidnappings and the tortures of Americans, Colonel William Higgins is always very close to my heart. And if somebody just wants to even Google, if they don't know what Hezbollah did to Higgins and what they did to William Buckley, and just it's an atrocious record, and we could just go on and on about the mayhem and the murder that the mullahs have perpetrated over the last 46 years. They've killed a lot of Americans, they've killed a lot of people, they've made their intentions very known. And what's in the mind of the people who minimize the threat that they pose? Why would they do that in terms of what I've just said? And when you look at the record on the war that they've been waging on the United States, and this all goes without saying, the concentration camp that they've maintained and tortured millions of their own people.
Well, you'll notice that Dave Smith didn't respond when I brought up all of those points. He didn't have any answer to that because that would lead inevitably to the further question, well, then if you're willing to stand all that the Islamic Republic has already done as acts of provocation to the United States, well, then how much are you willing? Where is your line? How far are you willing to let them push you? And this remains an unanswered question for all the people who are loudly trumpeting their non-interventionist credentials at this point. Now, look, everybody acknowledges also at this point, everybody acknowledges that the Iraq and Afghanistan wars were drastically mishandled, that it was 15 Saudis out of 19 hijackers with high-level connections to the Saudi government. And for that matter, it's been less remarked, but the Islamic Republic of Iran has also been implicated in an American court in helping to plot the 9/11 attacks, helping to carry out the 9/11 attacks. Imad Mughniya of Hezbollah, which is a creation and subsidiary of the Islamic Republic. Imad Mughniya accompanied some of the 9/11 hijackers to Iran and thence to Afghanistan, where they underwent training and then got them out with no record on their passport that they'd been in Iran at all, and back to the United States. And so George W. Bush invaded Iraq and Afghanistan when really, if you wanted to have wars with the countries that were most responsible for the 9/11 attacks, he would have gone to war with Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, that was not feasible. I'm not advocating that he should have done that at that time. I'm just saying those wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were wrongly conceived, wrongly executed, wrongly concluded. I wrote a book about the war in Afghanistan, Who Lost Afghanistan, that details how the whole thing was wrong-headed from the start. And these non-interventionists today are very proudly announcing their long-standing opposition to those misadventures, which I also shared at the time. I've got a March 2003 article on my website, Jihad Watch, showing why Bush's plan to go into Iraq was all wrong. And that was before we went in. And so these people, they're saying how they're trumpeting how right they were back then, and assuming falsely that the situation now is exactly the same. And once again, I am not advocating intervention into Iran. I'm not advocating troops on the ground in Iran. No sane, sensible person is. The fact is, though, that if you take Afghanistan on the one hand and Iraq and Iran on the other, they are so different as to make any kind of facile likening of the one situation to the other incredibly naive and completely useless as a tool to analyze the current situation. In Iraq, you had Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was a nominally secular ruler. He was growing more Islamic as time went on because he knew that was the way that his people were going. The majority of the Iraqi people wanted Islamic law. Surveys showed this. They voted this way. When he was toppled, the Shiites gained power because they have a majority of the population. The Sunnis would not accept their rule, which was inevitable and predictable, and they wanted Sharia in the Sunni areas, and this is what gave rise to ISIS. So you have chaos in the country, you have civil war circumstances, you have ISIS. It was a total mess, and the Christians are persecuted, and people say if we had not toppled Saddam Hussein, none of this would have happened. True fact. Saddam Hussein was a tyrant. He was bloodthirsty. He has a terrible human rights record. But what came after was worse. So you're talking about a situation where there's no good guy, there's no easy answer, but it does seem like a sensible judgment in hindsight that Saddam Hussein should not have been removed from power. And I was arguing before the war started that the people would want Sharia. Sharia was not compatible with Western-style democracy. George W. Bush was talking about installing democracy in Iraq, was saying it's never going to work. In Afghanistan, same thing, only more so. You had Sharia, you had the Taliban. 99% of the people in Afghanistan surveyed that answered surveys saying they wanted Sharia. So they really didn't have a problem with the Taliban. There might have been rival factions that also wanted Sharia, but they wanted to be the top dogs instead of the Taliban. But nobody was out there saying, we don't want Sharia, we want a Western republic in Afghanistan. George W. Bush goes in, he's going to make a Western republic in Afghanistan. There was never a chance this was going to work. And it was always going to blow up. And it did. And it took 20 years of waste, of so many lives, of so much military materiel, so much time wasted, so much American power and prestige lost. So it's understandable that a guy like Dave Smith, who after all, he's a comedian, you know? I mean, I think he's a comedian. They say he's a comedian. I've never actually seen him be funny. And I think that's what you have to do to be a comedian, but maybe not any longer. Maybe all you have to do now is say, Trump is bad, eh? And everybody laughs. But in any case, Dave Smith, he's not exactly an experienced geopolitical analyst. I don't know what he was doing 20 years ago, but I never heard of him. And I never heard of him until quite recently. I don't know that he was looking at the situation back then and saying that we shouldn't intervene. He seems like a young guy. I don't know that, maybe he was in school then. I don't know. But in any case, the point is that he does not really, with respect, I don't think he really has the tools. And I think a lot of these people that are making these facile comparisons between Iraq and Afghanistan on the one hand and Iran on the other, they don't really know what they're talking about. And they don't have the tools to analyze the situation because they don't know anything about Islam. They don't know anything about Islamic law, and they don't know the sentiments of the people in the countries involved vis-a-vis Islamic law. So you take Iran on the other side, and I know I'm going on long, pardon me, but I'm almost at the end here. In Iran, they've had Islamic law for 46 years, and they hate it. They hate the regime, and not only do they hate the regime, Jamie, but 99% of the people in Iran are Muslim officially, But according to a survey from a couple of years ago, only 40% are still Muslim. They're so disgusted with the regime that a vast majority of the people have actually left Islam altogether. So they do not want an Islamic Republic. This is just the opposite of the situation in Iraq and Afghanistan. They want to get rid of an Islamic Republic. And so the idea that if we intervene or give the regime a push to go away, that then there will be chaos and civil war and jihad groups vying. This is based on a lack of knowledge regarding what Iran is like. There's the Crown Prince, who has massive support in the country and has offered to lead a caretaker government. He's ready to step in. There are other groups in exile that are prepared to take a role. This is quite different from the situation after Saddam Hussein and after the first toppling of the Taliban. And so, well, it just seems to me there are a lot of people talking about what they don't know at this point.
Well, thank you, Robert. Time flies. 25 years ago, 24 years ago, we were working together at the Freedom Center, and I can testify to the fact, and I remember that you were warning that this is wrong-headed, and you were saying that this is a mistake in terms of the nation building in Islamic territory at that time, and the regime change. You were warning against it, and now you're just being slandered and libeled all the time as an interventionist. But you were a prophet at that time. I just want to say sometimes just like the way that Dave Smith talks and these other people about what's happening in Iran and condescendingly mocking whether Iran is a threat or not, or Islam is a threat or not. I think the Fogel family, the Bibas kids and their mom, William Higgins, William Buckley, they don't have the luxury of being here listening to this debate. Robert, it pains me to go into this area right now. I don't believe in shooting a general in the back on the front line. I love Trump. I think he's great. Thank God he won. There's so many things I like about him. He's defending our country. He saved our country. We could go on and on. And I've kind of bitten my tongue and looked the other way a couple times. Like, nobody's perfect. We're all going to disagree about a couple things here and there. But, I was a little bit skeptical about some of the things he was involved in and what he pushed during the plandemic or pandemic, whatever you want to call it. But okay, he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. My family's from the Soviet Union. In terms of who Putin is and the system that he represents, there's a few ways that kind of Trump has dealt with the Soviet invasion. It is the Soviet invasion, but the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the way he's talked about Putin. Just don't think that in terms of the torture and the monstrosity that the Soviets have caused to their own people in the world, I'm kind of not a fan of how Trump has dealt with Putin in terms of, I would say, lightly and with kid gloves. But look, I was always thinking, look, the guy's maybe not so sensitive, and there's a reason why. Because if Trump was a really sensitive guy with a big heart, let's say, on all these levels, he might have not survived everything that the enemies have tried to do to him. He might not be president, etc. So we got to cut this man some slack on many levels, etc., 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 etc. But I was thinking, if there are inmates of Auschwitz and you have a chance to liberate them, and then you say, we can still kind of do business dealings with the Auschwitz guards. We don't want too much chaos. What the F are you saying? You don't want too much chaos. So if we have a chance to liberate the inmates of Nazi concentration camps, if we have the chance to liberate the inmates of the Gulag Archipelago, of Kolyma, and liberate the Alexander Solzhenitsyns and the Varlam Shalamovs, and our attitude is that it would just create too much chaos, Look, I understand things are going on behind the scenes. Maybe he's being tricky, but there's just certain things that you don't say. And my worry is that when he was saying some of those things, that he meant them. And I just feel I feel brokenhearted on that. And I think that there's a certain betrayal of the Iranian people that have happened. And now reports are coming out that Netanyahu and the Israelis wanted to hit the security apparatus. They wanted to hit the KGB. I'm using an analogy here. They wanted to get rid of the KGB, of the Nazi brown shirts. They wanted to hurt the apparatus that is oppressing the Iranian people. And the reports are that Trump said, no, don't do that. And I see this, I'm very saddened by that, and I see it as a betrayal of the Persian people.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Jamie. It's a shame. It's understandable in a certain sense because, after all, the president is a businessman. He comes out of the business world, and he's famous for making deals. And his book is The Art of the Deal. He prides himself on being able to make deals, and he's shown this. He showed it with the people of he showed it with the Abraham Accords when John Kerry was saying you can't make a deal with the Middle Eastern countries without first settling the Palestinian issue, and Trump did it and bypassed the Palestinian issue and made agreements between Israel and various Arab countries on the basis of mutual self-interest and their shared threat from Iran. And so he's shown that he can think out of the box. He's shown that he can make deals with people that it seemed impossible to make deals with. And I think that once you do that, you might think you can do it every time. And that he thinks, all right, now Israel has won a great victory over Iran, and now we can settle down and have peace and make a deal. But it's just short of, as you noted, it's just short of where they need to be and what the situation is in Iran in terms of the people wanting to be free and needing help because the regime is so oppressive. There are opposition elements inside the country, but they're more outside the country because in Iran, you show any kind of opposition to the regime and you'll be killed by the regime.
Well, they're saying right now, just even in Iran, when you just even walk out of your home, they immediately check your phone. And I mean, they've got the Gestapo on every block. So they're really, there's a noose there right now around every neck.
Yeah. So Trump, well, I was disappointed too. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, you mentioned that maybe he's being tricky.
Yeah.
This is the side of him we have not seen before. Mm. This is not a man who has a big reputation for being subtle. He's a big, brusque, a large personality, and it's quite impressive, really, that he and Netanyahu, they seem to have fooled the entire world.
Right.
They carried out this operation against Iran and gave the impression that there was a rift between the two of them. They lulled the Iranians into complacency in various ways, and it was all a trick. And so, I think you got to give him credit. It's remotely possible that some other scenario of that kind is going on. I don't know, but the only
Robert,
thing is,
sorry to interrupt. So just in that, because I'm also reading reports that there's apparently a deal being worked out right now that some of the Arab countries will kind of occupy and oversee Gaza. Hamas leaders will be kicked out and the hostages will be returned. There's something going on in the background. So maybe there's something going on, right?
Yeah, it's possible. That's not a really good arrangement. that's being discussed vis-a-vis Gaza. It's Arab countries that are not necessarily at all friendly to Israel. I mean, after all, Egypt is one of them that's been named as participating in this. And Egypt has violated the Camp David Accords by allowing for a tremendous proliferation of anti Semitic rhetoric in the country that is directly inciting of violence. And so they're going to go into Gaza. I'm not sure that it's going to be all that different from having Hamas there. And they're going to allow the same kind of hatred of Israel, the same kind of incitement to jihad violence, the same vows to destroy the Jewish state and reoccupy so-called Palestine and so on. And so, it doesn't look like that's. And then ultimately, the idea is to pave the way for a Palestinian state, which, because of the ideology of jihad that everybody in Washington steadfastly ignores, would inevitably become another base for renewed jihad activity against whatever's left of Israel, as Gaza did after the Israelis withdrew in 2005.
Well, look, there's a reason why Trump is such a great man and I'm a nobody, in the sense that I give respect, and he knows a lot and has done a lot, and so I remain in a position of humility when I make criticisms, let's say. But I
Absolutely right. What you may be 10 times smarter than he is, but he has access to information we don't have. And so it's good to have reserve about any judgments at this point.
right. But having said that, I just want to say that when you think that everything is just a deal, everything's just a deal. Look, the KGB has other things in mind when they're making a deal. People who read the Quran and the Hadith, they have other things in mind when they're making a deal. And I think one could just make a little warning that Westerners, maybe even including our president, might not completely understand that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the fact that Iran agreed to a ceasefire at all is actually a bad sign. But I'm certain that nobody in the Trump administration is aware of this because they don't know the governing Islamic law. And the thing is that the Islamic Republic of Iran is indeed governed by Islamic law. And so it's foolhardy to make a deal with the Islamic Republic without knowing how Islamic law might influence it. And the Islamic law for these kinds of situations stipulates that you do not make an agreement with a non-Muslim power that you are at war with unless you're losing. And the only reason to make an agreement is not so that you can get over the hostilities and live side by side in peace. The only reason why you make an agreement is so that you can gather strength to fight again more effectively later. So, the only reason why it is certain, it's not my opinion. There's just no doubt about this because we know that the Islamic Republic follows Islamic law. We know that they only wanted a ceasefire now because they're losing. And they think that they can take the time to build back up to destroy Israel and America later.
Yeah. And Robert, so, I just hope that Trump is engaged in some kind of trickery theater. But when he says, they don't know what the F they're doing, and no, look, Iran launched that missile by mistake. What is he talking about? First of all, the Israelis know what they're doing. They've known what they're doing since their creation in 48. They're trying to survive the attempted genocide against them. So for him to say that, and look, at the risk of repetition, but I don't think it could be said too much, and then we'll move on to other issues. But when you look at what happened to Mahsa Amini, and the millions of Iranian women that she represents, and the millions of dissidents and people that she represents, and what they've suffered. And when you look at Neda and how she was assassinated, years back when she was on the street and the sniper hit her. When you look at the suffering of the prisoners and dissidents in Evin prison, and in general, once again, when you think about the inmates and the suffering people in an Auschwitz or in a gulag, to say that to liberate them would create chaos and chaos is bad, it's just heartbreaking for me. And I was very saddened when Trump said those words. Just wanted to say that one more time, and I'll hand it over to you and we'll move on, Robert.
I couldn't agree more. It doesn't look as if, from this vantage point anyway, that he has a full grasp of the situation. And like every other foreign policy analyst and every other policymaker in Washington for the last 25 years and longer, actually since the Islamic Revolution in Iran, they don't know anything about Islam, and yet Islam is the guiding force behind this whole conflict. I mean, even just consider this. Why does Iran hate Israel? Why does Iran want to destroy Israel? Serious question.
Yeah. And the people I've been debating with lately, they just keep telling me that if it wasn't for Israel, Iran wouldn't hate the United States. They just don't get it.
No, but Iran and Israel do not share a border. They do not have competing territorial claims. They do not have competing economic interests. There is nothing that would make them adversaries except Islam. Islam teaches that any land that belongs to Islam at any point belongs to Islam forever. And so they have to destroy Israel because it used to be ruled by Islamic law. That's the only reason for the conflict. And you would think that that would thus be elementary. And yet, I guarantee you, if I went into the State Department offices tomorrow and asked the first 100 State Department analysts that I encountered, why is Iran antagonistic toward Israel? None of them would be able to come up with the right answer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's tragic and it's willful blindness. You know, I was thinking of something else too, that so it's suicidal and stupid to leave that regime in power for the reasons that you're saying. But even the very reality of a wounded beast that hates you. So when you hurt somebody really bad that that hates you and you don't finish them off, chances might be high that they might not go away peacefully. They might plot revenge. So you're hurting the mullahs, but you leave them in power. You've got a wounded beast on your hands, and a wounded beast just regroups and could become far more dangerous than he already is years later, right?
Absolutely. Well, you know, they've already said they're going to restart their nuclear program. And Dmitry Medvedev, right? The former president of Russia, he's still a top Russian official. He all but admitted, he essentially admitted that they were making nuclear weapons and they're going to resume. And so Russia has been working with Iran for years. The man's in a position to know.
Robert, also, you know, because Trump, look, there's so much we don't know because Trump's talking about, oh, make America great again. And hey, if there's regime change, that might be great. Make Iran great again. Like one day he seems like he's for it. And then all of a sudden he's telling everybody in Tehran to get out. And then we're all thinking, oh, what's going to happen? And then all of a sudden he's talking about how regime change is chaotic and he's not really. So there's a lot of back and forth here. And it's a confusing situation, so we don't know a lot. But Robert, they keep extending a lifeline to the mullahs. This isn't the first time. So the powers that be in the world obviously want these bastards and monsters in power, right?
Yes, clearly. Because even when Trump was being a little bit more consistent and was pursuing the stringent sanctions against Iran, the European Union was stepping in and doing business with Iran. And it was clear that the leftist elites wanted the Islamic Republic. And they did not like that Trump was trying to undermine or weaken the Islamic Republic. And now the situation, as you say, it's just completely confused.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break with our sponsors and we'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to announce the next generation of energy drinks, Rev 7. It has no sugar and no caffeine. Instead, Rev 7 uses Go BHB. Go BHB is one of the body's primary ketones, and it provides the most efficient and clean fuel that your body needs. It also helps you stay energized all day with no crashes. Not only that, it produces 3 times more brain energy than sugar, which helps boost your memory, focus, and mental sharpness. It also helps reduce stress and helps balance your mood. Rev 7 does all that while being the best tasting energy drink ever. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save 20% today. I'm so sure you're going to love Rev 7. For a limited time, you get our introductory 3-pack absolutely free. I drink Rev 7 every day and I absolutely love it, and so will you.
And that's right. Make sure to go to mypillow.com or mystore.com and use promo code GG21. You're going to get a discount of up to 60% off all the amazing products, and you're going to be helping out the Glazov Gang as well as the great Mike Lindell. And if you like one-of-a-kind handmade art, make sure to go to lutfstudio.com and purchase resin art pieces made by our producer, the one and only Annie Cyrus. Use promo code Glazov Gang to get special discounts, and you're going to be helping out both the Glazov Gang and the great Annie Cyrus. Robert, how's your My Pillow doing? Or I put you on the spot. I could have sworn you had a My Pillow.
I don't. I've actually given up sleep.
Okay, we're gonna get the My Pillow into your hands, Robert. But Mike Lindell's a great guy, though, right?
Yes, no doubt about it.
Yes.
I am totally supportive of his company and hope that it prospers and grows.
Okay, and you recommend everybody to get a My Pillow, correct?
Everyone under the sun.
Okay, Robert, there was something there was a million scary things that were happening during the Israel-Iran war. And one thing is that the Iranians were making a lot of threats. That's also very interesting. They threaten. It sounded like something was going to be happening in every American city. Thank God it didn't happen, although, of course, some things are happening. But just in terms of sleeper cells, how worried should we be? We know that under Biden, they just let in so many dangerous characters and dangerous forces. Any comment on sleeper cells and the Iranian boasts during the war?
I don't think that, well, the boasts are designed to strike terror in the enemies of Allah. Mm-hmm. The threats and the boasts are designed to terrify and demoralize the people who are against the Islamic Republic. And so they don't think of it as making empty threats. And they did make empty threats. There were several nights last week and just a few days ago where they said, tonight we will unleash something that the world will remember for centuries. And there was nothing like that. The world ain't going to remember nothing that happened those nights. And that was that. And so why did they do that? Westerners think, well, that makes them look silly because they're issuing empty threats. It's empty bravado. But here again, they don't know the Quran. The Quran tells Muslims to strike terror in the enemies of Allah. They're supposed to frighten the enemies of Allah. So Iran, when they frighten their enemies, and these threats certainly did frighten many people, they think they've accomplished something that the God of the universe wants them to do, and that is good in itself. So that's the first thing. And as far as the sleeper cells go, it's a very real thing. There was just an Iranian sniper from the Iranian army who was arrested several days ago in rural Alabama, where he has been living. But it seems as if he's here on a mission from the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. And there was another Hezbollah operative who was also arrested in the last few days in Minnesota. So I think that's an indication of the fact that Iran is already working here to send its operatives into the country and to ultimately use them to carry out jihad terror attacks and to try to destabilize the American government. Of course, there are also the oft repeated threats of the Iranian regime to assassinate President Trump. Khamenei published a video a few years ago that I actually mentioned to Dave Smith, and he acted like it was fake, but it was on Khamenei's account that he posted on Twitter or X, that this video of Trump playing golf at Mar-a-Lago and a drone comes and kills him. And this is a clear threat that numerous Iranian officials have repeated openly, that they want to kill not only Trump, but also Vance, Marco Rubio, Elon Musk, and others.
Thank you, Robert. Well, on to other heartening and inspiring news. We got this character, NYC mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, who just won the Democratic primary. I think you and I were on the same page. We're just tragically, unfortunately, watching the suicide of the West. And we're just wondering how much longer it's going to take. But we fight every minute till our dying breath, and we're going to keep fighting. But there's a lot of people with blinders on, willful blinders, and but we call it like we see it. And I see a suicide happening when New York City and everything that New York City represents in America, when it's about to have a mayor that's pro-jihad, pro-communism, I mean, it's very symbolic, and it's a turning point, right? Tell us about this character.
Yeah, well, certainly if he carries out his agenda, it will destroy New York, and that will have tremendous repercussions for the rest of the country. He is a communist, as you noted. I was just working on an article earlier about how in 2020 he took a tweet from the Communist Party of India in one of the Indian states, and they had tweeted photos of the new governor of a city in India who was a communist and was standing there in just the kind of pose that we are familiar with, if you're familiar at all with communist propaganda, the kind of steely determination and looking as if you're looking at some terrible foe and you're not going to be cowed in the face of the adversary, and so on. It looked like Chinese communist propaganda from the Cultural Revolution, but it's this Indian mayor, and he put up atop this tweet, he said, what kind of mayor does New York City need? And it was very clear that what he was saying was New York City needs a Marxist mayor. And so he has shown himself to be that Marxist. He has spoken, for example, about free grocery stores and lots of other free stuff that presumably he will make available or will try to. Now, the thing about free stuff, Jamie, as we all know, anybody who's studied socialism or communism for 5 minutes knows somebody always has to pay for the free stuff. So presumably he's going to levy prohibitive taxes upon the wealthy in New York so that they can fund all the free things he's giving out. The wealthy will then leave the city rather than pay his taxes, and then New York will be impoverished. And not having money to even cover the basic resources, and he wants to defund the police anyway. It will also have a rise in crime, accompanied by a rise in the jihad activity that obviously, as a Shiite Muslim, which is a 12er Shiite like the Islamic Republic of Iran, he's not going to have a whole lot of problem with that. He's unlikely to move decisively against it. And so the only way that he could make his system viable at all would be to build a wall to keep all the people in who are going to be fleeing. Is anybody of any means and who wants to live in any safety is going to be leaving the city. And he can't, it's unlikely he's going to be able to build a wall, at least right now. And so the city will be destroyed, as the only people left in it will be the criminals and the jihadis and the people who are too impoverished to leave.
Oh, Robert, come on. You know, we saw what happened in the Soviet Union and Maoist China, the Khmer Rouge, North Vietnam. Let's just try it one more time.
Yeah, it's kind of absurd that we're actually at this point, that it's actually seriously on the table. But apparently we have to go through it here as well. It's going to, New York is a great city, one of the greatest cities on the planet, as well as the greatest city in the country. It's a shame to see what it's likely to become with a communist mayor, but I think it's really disquieting that he can just be the Democratic candidate, and the Democrat Party has no problem with this guy being a Marxist.
But wait a minute, Robert. I mean, come on. There's just a little bit of hope. He's got some good sides, too. I mean, he wants to spend millions of dollars on sex changes for minors. It's, yeah. And actually, maybe I shouldn't even be joking about that. I mean, because this is satanic child sacrifice and forcing people to pay for it. But Robert, what also fascinates me is how, you know, in pre-Soviet Russia, for instance, the pre-Soviet Russia, you have the liberals, quote unquote, for the Bolsheviks. Then the Bolsheviks come in, and who do they execute first? The liberals, right? So, you know, the revolutions, they eat their children. So we've got the Marxists and the jihadists, and yes, they're together, united, because they're going to overthrow the evil capitalists and the people who want freedom, etc. But it's going to be very interesting because you've got this pro-jihad guy that's promising to make City Hall Muslim, but at the same time, he's for all this trans stuff. And you know that they're going to butt heads eventually. The question is, who's going to kill who? But I think that in this case, I think the jihadists are going to obviously eliminate the leftists, just like they did in Iran, right?
Whenever they've worked together, they did work together to bring in the Islamic Republic, and then the Islamic Republic killed the communists. And so I think it's likely that that'll be the same thing in this case. He wants to make use of the chaos, like, you know, spending all this money for gender changes and all that nonsense. And that will be in the hope of arousing unrest that he can then use to justify authoritarianism. And that all is clear, but then the competing authoritarianisms will come up against each other. And I think it's likely that Islam will win out. It has a longer track record and is more tenacious.
Thank you, Robert. It's incredible how Stockholm Syndrome develops in a population. New York City was hit on 9/11, and now 2 decades later, or 2.5 decades later, the same city is voting for a guy that wants to globalize the Intifada, and I think he has said something along those lines. So wow. All this Islamophobia propaganda and don't be racist and Islam is a religion of peace, it traumatized and brainwashed a population. And of course, add to that all the pro-jihad people that they brought in, and also all the propaganda that they've been teaching the younger generation, right?
Yeah, it shows the power of propaganda and all the things that you mentioned. Because I think back, and now what is it, Jamie? My goodness, it's 15 years ago, I guess, that maybe longer, that Pamela Geller and I had rallies against the Ground Zero Mosque, and we were shocked at the huge size of the crowds, at the fact that so many people turned out to protest against the Ground Zero Mosque in New York City. That would have been a triumphal mosque celebrating a jihad attack, whatever the organizers claimed. That we had 15, 20,000 people in New York City. And it's amazing to me that, what is it, a decade and a half later, those people are not around in sufficient numbers to defeat this guy. And I think that's the power of propaganda, that, as you noted, that all this time, the authorities in New York and elsewhere have been pounding into people that it's Islamophobic to oppose jihad violence, even to talk about it, even to acknowledge that it exists. So they don't even have the conceptual apparatus to see how dangerous Mamdani is.
Yeah. And while all this is happening, just look over into Syria, the St. Elias massacre. What's happening to the Orthodox churches there? What's happening to Christians there? Not a word. I mean, who invited you in the establishment media to talk about the attack and the massacre against the Christians in Syria? What's happening in Nigeria? Genocide against Christians escalating as always, and a complete silence in the West, right?
Yep. No doubt about it.
But what would you say about what just happened to the Orthodox Church in Syria?
Well, it's tragic, it's terrible, but it's entirely predictable. This is a jihadi in charge of this country. And Trump goes and shakes his hand and talks about making a deal with him. And here again, I think, do you really know what you're dealing with here? This guy, he says he's not a jihadi anymore. And Westerners are altogether too willing to take that at face value. They don't take into account the fact that deception is something that is allowed for in Islamic law. Deception of unbelievers based on the Quran, based on Muhammad saying war is deceit, and so on. And it seems to me Ahmed al-Shara is demonstrating that he has not changed. When forces sympathetic to his government or linked to his government, they carry out these kinds of attacks. There are threats against other churches coming up this Sunday. We can hope that they're just empty threats, but we don't know yet. And to make a deal with such people, there's just no way it can work out well. But the people of Syria, the Christians of Syria, they understand all too well what's happening. They've lived through it before. As a matter of fact, the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch, John X Yazigi, he issued a statement after the massacre at Mar Elias Church, saying to Ashura, this has not happened. Such a killing of Christians in Damascus has not happened since 1860 until your tenure. And before 1860, it was Islamic jihadis, and now it's an Islamic jihadi. And John X knows very well what's happening.
And Robert, whether you're Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg and Sonny Hostin, or if you're Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith and these characters, when you don't have a show on what happened in Damascus, and you don't have a show on behalf of the Christians there and what happened to them, and you don't invite people like you and Bosch Foston and David Wood and Annie Cyrus to explain what inspires and sanctions the murders, then you really know who these people are. Robert Spencer, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for telling the truth all of these years, and for taking all the bullets and all the slander and all the libel that you've suffered and continue to suffer for telling the truth. You're a stand-up guy. We love you at the Glazov Gang. Your final words of wisdom and suggestions to our viewers of where to go to follow you and support you if they don't already.
Well, as far as final words of wisdom, just don't give up. We got to keep going here. Um, I don't know what the president is up to, but I still hope for a positive conclusion. And meanwhile, I'm at jihadwatch.org, still tracking jihad activity every day, and at jihadwatchrs on Twitter. And the books are at Amazon, Anti-Semitism, History and Myth. And then I've got another one, Holy Hell, Islam's Abuse of Women and the Infidels Who Enable It, coming out in November. And then in the spring of 2026, another one called The Tragedy of Islam, Failure and Excuses, about how Islam is demonstrably bad for societies and individuals. And so those books, The Tragedy of Islam is not at Amazon yet, but it will be soon. But the others are at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and wherever fine books are sold.
Well, keep up the great work, Robert. We support you all the way. We're your cheerleaders, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Glazov Gang this evening. Make sure to support Robert and follow him at jihadwatch.org and get some of his books. Get all of his books. But if you're going to get any book right now, Anti-Semitism, History and Myth, and of course, in terms of what's happening in Iran, you can get his The Complete Infidel's Guide to Iran. We'll see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.